Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business School for Parentpreneurs podcast. My name is Sigal Bekker-Saban, and I'm here today with Josh Klemons, a social media expert. Let me tell you, hi, Josh, first of all. It's good to have you. I'm broadcasting from Orlando, Florida. Where are you broadcasting from?
I'm in sunny Madison, Wisconsin.
Awesome. I want to tell you guys a little bit about Josh. So Josh is a digital storyteller and strategist, and he's the founder of Reverbal Communications and helps brands of all shapes and sizes find, hone, and tell their stories online. And I'm going to let Josh tell us how he got into digital storytelling and dive deeper into his story. And the reason I thought it would be so awesome to bring him on is because parentpreneurs, we're busy. We don't have time. Josh is currently writing a book called Mastering Your Social in 20 Minutes a Day. And I thought it would be so awesome to learn from Josh. How do you master your social in 20 minutes a day? So without further ado, by the way, I forgot to mention, Josh is also the host of Step Up Your Social podcast, which I listen to with my teens, and very awesome podcast. So Josh, welcome again. I think first things first, how about you tell us, how do we master our social media in 20 minutes a day?
Sure. Yeah. So social media is something you have to tend to on an ongoing basis. You can't just check in once a week and expect it to do anything for you. But there's a big line between, spending all of your time in social and actually running your business, right? Like it can become a huge problem. And so I work with clients of all shapes and sizes. Sigal sort of mentioned in my intro, like helping them find, hone, and tell their stories. Literally everything from solopreneurs and tiny nonprofits, people like side hustles, all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. And the thing that I find that brings them all together is nobody has time for social. If you don't have a full-time marketing department, social is always something that's sort of like, it's an afterthought, it falls by the wayside, or it becomes something that people are spending too much time on at the expense of what they should be spending their time on, which is growing their business, because social is not everything, although sometimes it feels like it is. So I put together essentially a presentation called Master Your Social Media in 20 Minutes a Day years ago, and it's adapted and evolved over time, but essentially I'm still giving it because it's still completely relevant. And the short answer is you have to figure out a way to create systems that enable you to take the power of your day and prepare you for your 20 minutes. So the short answer is there's no magic to it. There's no secret, but you need to make sure that if you read a New York Times article that you think is going to be relevant to your audience, and then you move on, and then you go back to find it tomorrow, you'll waste half of your 20 minutes looking for that article. You can't do 20-minute day social. So instead, what you need to do is have a system to share that, to save that New York Times article, to come up with that list of frequently asked questions, to come up with those concepts, and make sure that when you're ready to live your 20 minutes a day, so whether it's 8 a.m. on, in the morning, or, noon, or 4 p.m. or midnight, doesn't matter what time you choose to do it, you've sort of got your content set up and ready to go. So a lot of it is about creating systems that make it easier that when you're ready to go for 20 minutes a day, you're ready to go. So, and I can get into all those specifics
please.
when you're ready.
Like, for example, can you give an example of a system that you or a client of yours has set up that makes things easier, streamlines the sharing of content?
So the first thing is you need to create a system to find the content you want to share. So you should set up an RSS feed. The one I use is called Feedly. I'm not an affiliate marketer for them. I just like them. Every tool I mentioned today is free. Most of them have paid versions, but I'm only going to mention free tools.
Yeah, Feedly. And I'm gonna quickly add on that you have a terrific podcast episode about free tools that we're underusing. So please go ahead.
Yeah,
how is Feedly going to help me?
Yeah, a whole lot of these concepts I've laid out in the podcast, Step Up Your Social. But yeah, obviously you're listening to this podcast now, so let's talk about it here too.
All right,
so Feedly is it's an RSS feed where it essentially enables you for free to subscribe to up to 100 blogs. And that blog could be anything from the New York Times fashion section to your neighbor's blog about cars. So anything, like really anything. And essentially you could subscribe and then break down into categories so that instead of bopping around the entire internet looking for news that's going to be relevant to your audience, you can just go to one place, feedly.com. And once you've spent the time to set it up, you've got this list of content that's constantly ready to go. So instead of you having to say, oh, what should I tell my audience today? You can go find things you know are going to be helpful for them and maintain that level of expertise. Like show them you're the expert in your field because you took the time to set up your Feedly account. Another one that everybody should be using, and most people are not, is Facebook Pages to Watch. If you go to your Facebook Insights in the overview section and scroll down to the bottom, there's this literally magic tool called Pages to Watch that lets you see what any public page on Facebook is doing and what's performing best for them. So if 3 of your, let's say, competitors or influencers in your space are all sharing the same type of content around some new study, don't steal their content, but be inspired by it. So like create the system so that you can hop in there and see what's going on. Google Alerts are a shockingly powerful tool. Like I say shockingly because everybody knows what they are and nobody uses them. So it goes without saying you should have a Google Alert for yourself. Like you want to know somebody, good, bad, or otherwise, if somebody's talking about you online. But what else should you have Google Alerts for? I personally set up Google Alerts for a whole lot of my clients. I set them up for key terms in my industry. I want to know what's happening in the world. And one of the cool things about Google Alerts is you can set them up to give you an alert the moment they happen, or in daily or weekly digests. So if it's a key term that gets a lot of hits, you don't necessarily need to get that as it comes in. If you're in the artisanal tennis shoe company, every time somebody talks about tennis shoes, you're going to drown in emails. But you could set it up to just send you emails once a day. And if you set that, and you can factor that into your 20 minutes, part of your 20 minutes is going through the content that exists in the world and figuring out what there is to share. Some other ones that I'll just share.
And then I'm sorry, just to finish that thought up. So then you pull out, you find an alert gives you about a topic that you're interested in. You pull out that article and you share it with your audience with a few thoughts.
During your 20 minutes a day.
That's your 20 minutes. Okay.
So that's part of it. And I'll break down, there's 4 parts that go into a successful social channel. So I like to say your job is to sell, to share, engage, listen, and learn. SELL. So you need to share content that's relevant to them. You need to engage people. If they're talking to you and you're ignoring them, you should just log off social. Like there is no reason, you will get no benefits of social media if you're not willing to engage with people. Listen is like setting up those systems and hearing the content that's out there in the world. So what are people talking about on Google? What are people talking about on your Facebook Pages to Watch? And then the last one, learn, is you need to be checking your analytics on a regular basis. Because if you're not checking your social channels analytics, you really don't know what's working. So you're just wasting your time.
How often should we check our analytics? Every day?
So I break down the 20 minutes. I sort of say there's different ways to think about it. One of the ways would be to do 5 minutes of each of those every day. But honestly, you could probably do analytics once or twice a week for 10 minutes and then factor the rest of your time broken up into. So like I have an example, listen for 7 minutes a day, share for 5, learn for 3, engage for 5, or listen for 10, share and engage for 10, and learn for 10, just once.
So you take these 20 minutes and you break them down. Is that what you were just doing?
That is my recommendation. Is like how, like literally have a system.
Divide it up.
Set an alarm and say, okay, I have 10 minutes. Let me go look at my analytics. Let me make sure I understand. Okay, I have 15 minutes. Let me go see what's going on in the world. 5 minutes to go engage folks. Yeah, literally like break up your 20 minutes in a way that works for you.
What should we be looking for, the main thing in the analytics, in our social media analytics? Which
posts are doing well and why. So I always like to say that analytics give you no answers. They give you great questions.
Love it.
You told me your family is nomads. And my guess is you probably talk a lot about your travels. And if like, are you all in an RV or are you doing hotels and cars? So you're in an RV. Every time you post a picture of an RV, your posts explode. Like it doesn't matter the content. People just love pictures. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying if that's true, analytics is not telling you why that post is doing well. It's telling you that the post is doing well. And it's up to you to find the common thread. Oh, every time I post on a Wednesday morning, that post does really well. Every time I talk about my kids, my post does really well.
So look for patterns.
Articles, not so much.
Right. So look for patterns of what's working well. Okay.
I would say your audience is literally talking to you through your analytics. It's your job to understand what they're saying. And the problem is that most people never bother to even try to listen. And if you're not listening, you're never going to learn. You don't know what they want to hear because you're not paying attention to them. You're just putting content in the world and thinking, well, this is fun, without having any idea of what's actually performing well.
Okay. All right. So that's mastering your social in 20 minutes a day.
That's a couple pieces of it. Yeah.
Yes. I thought it would be awesome, Josh, if you could chime in about the different social media platforms and maybe the biggest mistakes that you see people making. I'm sorry, just a second.
Oh, you're fine.
Guys. Sorry.
You're all good. You're all good.
Okay. So what, obviously you work with a lot of people on social media. You've been doing this for a while. You've been doing this in politics. You still do it sometimes. And you're doing this with the private sector. I want to know, what are things that you see people doing and you're like, you catch your head and you're like, no, don't do that. And what are some terrific habits and practices to get into? So should we jump into Facebook first? Tell me, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making on Facebook when they're building their brands?
So part of my mastering your social in 20 minutes a day factors into this. Optimize your accounts. Take advantage of the tools that Facebook provides you when you're setting your account up. Make sure your avatar tells your story in a quick, succinct way. Make sure your cover photo isn't out of date. Use pinned posts if it's relevant, because like if you're not optimizing your accounts, you're not making your accounts like look professional. It doesn't matter how good your content is. Somebody gets to your page and they see that your cover photo is promoting an event that happened 3 weeks ago. It's like you have a really nice storefront, but the sign still says closed. Like nobody's going to come in because they assume you're not paying attention to your content. So I would say the biggest mistake I see on social across all platforms in general is people don't engage and they auto post and auto create content. And those, to me, if you can take those two things out of your social vocabulary, you will step up all of your social across platforms by a factor of more than I can possibly imagine. I mean, it's like those are two of the biggest mistakes. So when I say don't engage, if somebody asks, let's say you're a restaurant and somebody asks you, hey, do you sell gluten-free pizza? If you can't be bothered to answer, do you think that they're then going to come in anyway? Or do you think they're going to ask the next place? Because I can pretty much guarantee they're not going to come in. You just lost that client because like people expect you to respond to them. And so it's your job to like engage people. This is not a one-way conversation. It's a two-way conversation. And if somebody has something nice to say about you and you can't be bothered to thank them or like it, like you think they're going to say something nice to you again in the future? Probably not. And if you're Nike, you can afford to like ignore that maybe. But for like those of us running small businesses and trying to engage like audiences, like this has to be a conversation or people are going to stop chiming in. And then the second thing that I mentioned was auto posting. I see this all the time across all kinds of platforms. It's one of the biggest mistakes people make, in my opinion, for many reasons. So auto posting means I do something on one website and it automatically sends something someplace else. So you get this sometimes like, and I hope I'm not calling anybody out who's listening or hosting or whatever, like, I don't know. So like I have a new podcast episode and then I automatically generate an email to tell you about it that doesn't say anything, but that I have a new podcast episode. If you can't give me a reason to be excited about that podcast episode, just stay out of my feed. Like you're not doing anybody any favors by spamming me. You instead need to tell me a story, give me some takeaways, give me a reason to want to listen. And I get this all the time with podcasts, with blogs. Like I get an email when somebody has a new blog. I'm like, great. Tell me something about the blog. Don't just tell me you have a blog. Tell me why I should want to read it. People's time is such a precious resource these days. You cannot expect them to follow you. You need to meet them where they are. So if I go on Twitter and I see a link to an Instagram picture, I'm rolling my eyes. I'm not clicking that picture. Like, I don't want to see your link. I want to see your photo. And it would not have taken much more time for you to take that same photo and put it into Facebook and put it into Twitter instead of just auto posting it. So
when you're cross posting in multiple platforms, you need to personalize or customize or tell a story or speak the language of the platform.
Exactly. And I'm very pro cross posting because time is limited. You do not need. Yes, there are those who would say you need a separate strategy, and some pieces of content do not make sense across all platforms. Of course, like if you're sharing an article, you can't share it on Instagram, and some things are going to fit better on LinkedIn than on Facebook. But at the end of the day, if the content fits on all three channels, don't worry about it getting seen by people multiple times. It's hard enough to get them to see it once. They're not going to see it 3 times. So cross post, I'm actually in favor of. Cross posting is the act of taking one piece of content and fitting it per platform. Auto posting is the one where you're doing yourself a huge disservice because your content looks bad. And another big danger of auto posting, and I see this a lot like on Twitter, especially people auto post to Twitter and they forget that they're even on Twitter. So they don't go back and people are like asking them questions or chiming in and they're not responding. And that's the cardinal sin of social media, is like thinking that you can talk at your audience. Again, if you've got 100 million followers, Beyonce level, you can do whatever you want. But if you're trying to like grow an audience with like a small group of people and grow that into a larger group of people, if you're not willing to like respect their time, you're wasting your own. Like there's no benefits that come from that.
I want to bounce off of that, what you just said. So there's Facebook and there's Instagram and there's LinkedIn and there's Twitter and there's on and on and on. what would you say to someone, a lot of people who are new entrepreneurs who are relatively new to the internet, even if they've been there for 1, 2, 3 years, feel overwhelmed? Like, that's a lot of platforms. Like, should we choose one platform and focus on it? Should we be everywhere all the time? Lots of moving pieces, lots of people responding in the different platforms. What would be the best strategy, do you think?
Don't be on more platforms than you have the bandwidth to manage. That's the easiest, shortest version. Like, nobody wins if you're bad at a lot of platforms. You're much better off being good at one. And as you get to a point where you feel confident on that one, feel free to add a second one to the mix, and a third and a fourth. But you being on every platform because they exist and not having good content to share, not engaging with people, you're not helping your audience, you're not helping yourself, and you're sure as heck not helping your business. So yes, do not be on platforms if you don't have the bandwidth to manage them.
So what I'm hearing you say is, if I'm feeling like I'm good enough and I could handle and I could serve my audience on 2 platforms, increase to 2 or increase to 3. But until then, stay with one, and that will be good enough to grow
So the
my brand.
questions I would ask before expanding are, why am I going onto this platform? Is my audience there? Does it fit my content? So I wouldn't just say like, oh, I'm killing it on LinkedIn, I'm going to go start on a new platform. Like, maybe you don't need to be anywhere but LinkedIn. The biggest question is, where's your audience? Where does your content fit? But none of that stuff matters if you don't have the bandwidth to manage it, right? Like, you might be perfectly tailor-made content for TikTok, but just not have the time in the day to be there. So don't be there. But also don't be there if your audience isn't there, right? Like, if you're trying to talk to like commercial bankers and you're on TikTok, like, that's probably not the best use of your time. So it's really a question of, where's your audience? Where does your story fit? But more important than any of that is, where do you have time to actually like spend? Because it doesn't matter how good a fit the platform might be for you. If you don't have time for it, it's going to be bad.
Okay. Let's talk for a second about live streaming on Facebook. I'm going back to Facebook.
Yeah.
What are some common mistakes that you see people make that you just say to yourself, don't do this?
Bad lighting, bad audio, and shaky camera. So go on Amazon. If you don't already have one, go on Amazon, spend $20 and buy yourself a tripod. It is a great investment. I regularly see people holding a camera and it looks like they're holding it. Now, sometimes that's what it is. You're at a parade, like, you're going to hold it out. Give people notice that you're going live. Sometimes that's not possible. A celebrity walks into your store, you're going to pull out your phone, and if they give you permission, you're going to go live with permission. Of course, you're going to go live. And that just is what it is. But if it's not something that was spontaneous, like, don't just jump in. Let people know it's coming. Send an email like, hey, we're going to be going live tomorrow at 3 to talk about this. One of the best things to do with live is engage your audience. Again, it's the less it's a one-way conversation, and the less it's one direction and the more it's multi-direction, the better. So my congressman here in Madison, Wisconsin, regularly hosts Q&As through Facebook. Through Facebook Live, he answers questions from the audience. Now, if you, the listener out there, tries to do that, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to be disappointed. It's going to be embarrassing because nobody's going to ask questions. But guess what? You don't need people to ask questions in real time for you to answer frequently asked questions. Those questions are out there. Know what they are. Make sure that what you're doing with Facebook Live and with all content is adding value to your audience. And that's a bar none. Like, you want to make sure that your audience is getting value from what you're doing. It can't just be about promoting yourself and your brand. It needs to be adding value to them. Now, I know Sigal, but I wrote a very brief sort of like checklist that's worth downloading.
I'm going to add that on and you guys can download it. Josh wrote a checklist about how to do Facebook Live, so you will have the opt-in for that attached.
And it's just simple things to prep before you go live, while you're live, and when you're done going live. So it's a very simple checklist of just essentially things for you to be thinking about before you just jump in. Like, ask yourself, okay, these questions. One other big thing to be aware of is, if you're on your phone, make sure you have battery. Plug in if you need to, because that's, if your phone dies, your live dies.
Yeah,
but
from experience.
Yeah, the most important thing, and I would say, like, this is true for live, but it's true for all social, is like, are you adding value to your audience's life? And if you are, great. And if you're not, figure out how to do so, because nobody. So I always like to ask this question when I'm like doing public speaking. It's a series of 2 questions. Who here goes onto social media hoping to be pitched to by brands and nonprofits and political campaigns, hoping to be asked for things? Nobody. And who here puts on their marketing hat, goes on social, and starts pitching? everybody. Like it's what we do. And there's a broken dichotomy between how we use social as a user and how we use social as a marketer. And until we bridge that broken dichotomy, we're always going to be disappointed. So the first thing you need to ask yourself, bar none, is if I didn't work for this company or volunteer at this nonprofit, would I care about this content? And if the answer is no, you need to figure out a way to create content that's going to be interesting to your audience. And the easiest way, bar none, to be helpful to your audience every time, be helpful. Teach them something. Make them smarter about what you do. That's called content marketing. Like pure and simple. Like I put that Facebook Live checklist out into the world for free, no strings attached, because like this is what I do for a living. I help people be better at social. It does lead to clients for me, but I don't ever expect it to. Like I'm just putting content out in the world all the time. And people are like, oh, this guy's really helpful. He's helped me a lot with social. I have a friend who's starting a business. Give him a call. But like, you can't do it with the end goal in mind or you'll be disappointed. You need to be willing to go out there and just invest time and energy into like making people smarter. And it's definitely an investment that, I've helped many clients figure out ways to help it pay for itself.
Okay. Before I jump into the next platform, any big mistakes that you see people in doing personal page versus brand page or groups versus pages? Anything that jumps to mind?
Well, definitely personal page. First of all, if you've created a personal page that's fake just for the context of creating a brand page, you're breaking Facebook terms of service. You're not supposed to do that.
When you say personal page, do you mean like a blogger page or the personal feed?
We're talking about Facebook or no?
Facebook, yeah.
So with Facebook, if you can friend a page, it's a personal page. If you can like a page, it's a brand page.
Got it. Okay.
So your personal page is not allowed to be used for business purposes. Now, there's a fine line between some people and their businesses. Like, Sigal, if you were going to be like an influencer on Facebook and your friends know you as the like expert to come to like parenting business advice, like, okay, Facebook's not going to have a hard time with that. But I've heard horror stories, bands that were using personal pages instead of brand pages that got deleted from Facebook without notice. They spent years building up a platform of their audience, and overnight it disappeared because they were breaking terms of service.
So best practice there is open a page for your brand, and that's where you do your...
Always use a brand page if it's for a business or even like a hobby, and don't spam your personal page with content about it. Like, so I always like to use the example. Let's say, imagine you're a punk band, right? Based in Madison, Wisconsin. And I have a whole podcast episode on this very topic. Stop inviting everybody you know to like your Facebook page. It actually is bad for you in the algorithm to have a whole lot of likes of people who don't care about your content. You're better off having 100 punk fans who might actually show up to your show than 1,000 people who, oh, that was my neighbor. Oh, that's cool. Like, I'm so proud of you. Like your aunt,
your grandma, or your mom.
Like your page. Yeah. It's actually hurting your reach because the Facebook algorithm is based on how quickly do people actually care about your content, not your page. So you might have 1,000 likes, but only 20 people of that actually cares about your content. You're never going to reach those 20 people because Facebook's never going to show that content to anybody because 95% of the people who see your content don't care about what you're talking about. And Facebook knows that. The algorithm is brutal, and you are far better off having smaller number of likes of people who care than the biggest number possible of people who don't. So that's a huge mistake people make. The other big thing that I see people do a lot is they post to their personal page things that should go on their brand page. So if it's like business related, 100% of the time it should go to your brand page. And if you think it's relevant for your personal page, share the post from your business page to your personal page. Because that will actually help you grow your business page. You'll get the analytics, you'll get the platform, the power of the platform, as opposed to sharing it to your personal page separately, where you're like creating two pieces of content. Yeah, so definitely. And then the other big thing is don't share every piece of content from your business page to your personal page. Right. If somebody cares about your business, they'll follow you over there. So I would say differentiate the things that everybody who loves you is going to care about versus your business people are going to care about. So if you're that band, don't share everything to your personal page because people are going to start unfriending you and muting you and hiding you. But if you like win an award, yeah, that's something you can share to your personal page. Or you're playing a huge venue that's going to be exciting.
So share highlights. Right. Are groups relevant in social media? Should anyone open a group?
Yes, and depends. So groups are a huge topic that I talk about. I have a whole presentation called Groups Are the Future of Facebook. I'm a huge advocate that groups are a powerhouse of Facebook. But first of all, not every brand should have a group. Second of all, if you're going to have a group, make sure you understand why. You can't just do it to promote yourself. You need to do it to add value. So one of the examples that I love of a brand who does groups really well, and I'm not a Red Bull guy and I'm not a mountain bike guy, but Red Bull has a Facebook group called The Bike Shed that is literally just for photos and videos of people sharing, talking about biking, like mountain biking. Totally in line with their brand. Like, Red Bull gives you wings and watch me fall off this mountain on my, my bike. Why do it? Because it's user-generated content up the wazoo. I mean, it's just coming and coming and coming, constant content. And the algorithm prefers content from groups than it does from pages. So it's a win-win for everybody because people are seeing all this content they love. And every time they see it, they know it's connected to a Red Bull page without it actually coming from Red Bull. So Red Bull wins, the users win. So yes, I'm a big advocate of groups, but to me, honestly, most of the value I get out of groups is not for my brands that I work with. It's for learning and networking. So we met in a Facebook group, I believe,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right? I've met lots of smart people in Facebook groups. I'm an admin of one Facebook group that's a powerhouse in my toolkit. I'm a member of a bunch of others that are powerhouses. I'll tell you this right now, and this is an example I use a lot. When I started my podcast, I was a big podcast listener, but I didn't know anything about starting a podcast. So of course, the first place I went was Google, and I read a bunch and I tried to get info, but I hit a wall. Like Google didn't have all the answers. And I was like, I know where does. So after Google, the very next place I went, I found a Facebook group for podcasters, tens of thousands of podcasters from all over the world. And you better believe if I have a question, there's like 1,000 people in there that know the answer. And I didn't even have to ask the questions. All I had to do was search through old questions, and 99% of my questions got answered. Every now and then I find a new quirk and I get to chime in and ask something. But they've been this amazing resource of just like bringing people together around common ideas. So look to groups both for your brand, but more importantly for yourself. Like find ways to learn and to grow your Facebook groups. It's an amazing networking and learning tool.
Right. So you could leverage groups to even get clients, for prospecting, for getting your answers answered, and for just getting shortcuts.
I would add, though, go into groups with the same kind of mentality. That
right.
If don't go in there.
Don't go in
Imagine
to
a networking
sell.
event. If you're walking up to everybody trying to sell them a car, you're not selling any cars. But if every time somebody asks a question about a car, you're the one answering it, no strings attached, and you're also the guy that has like great car jokes, and you're also the guy that has great car facts,
right.
like people are going to be like, oh, that's the guy to call when I need a car. Right. And I would say go to groups too. I have gotten clients through groups, but I've never tried to get a client through groups. Like I go in there, I
love that.
I engage, and like clients come to me because people see that like I add value to the group and they want to talk to me, not because I'm in there saying, hey, you should hire me. I'm the social media guy. Nobody wants that.
Which would be probably a huge mistake, right? Now, let's quickly hop through the platforms. Instagram, biggest mistake that you see and best practice.
Well, spamming people on Instagram, as with all platforms, is a problem. That's a good one. Instagram's changed a lot over the years. I think I don't know that I have like common mistakes on that one. I have for all the others for sure. Instagram's interesting because it's like it's such a simple platform, and they've complicated it recently. So it's like it was like hard to like make too many mistakes. I definitely think, I get so much spam on my Instagram account. I'm sure you do too. So like if you find yourself spamming people, like that's bad. Not engaging. It's really easy to forget that like people comment, like you should respond, you should like it. Take advantage of stories. Stories as a standalone feature of Instagram has over 500 million daily average users. That's 1.5 Americas. 5.5 million. Did I say 1,000?
No. You got it.
Okay, cool. 5.5 million daily users just for stories. That's not Instagram total, that's stories. So if you're not taking advantage of stories, you're missing a huge opportunity there. And then, like Reels is the Instagram knockoff of TikTok. I've done a bunch of Reels. Most of them were fine. And then I did one recently that actually blew up. So it's like, pay attention to what's new. The main reason to use what's new on any social channel, but especially Instagram and Facebook, is that they are going to prioritize in the algorithm people who do new things. So if they say, we're doing Reels now, if you take advantage of Reels, they will reward you for being a trendsetter by giving you a lot of reach. So I had this one post like blow up, like, just huge because like they wanted it. There's a cool Instagram feature called guides, like that nobody knows exists, but it's actually really cool and it's worth playing with. If you go to my blog, if you just Google,
I noticed it. It was a wonderful post explaining how guides work. Yeah.
So yeah, I have a blog a blog post on how guides work, which I'm a big fan of. But then I also have another one a little bit further back called The Evolution of Instagram, that actually walks through when Instagram started all the way through to today with all of the major sort of like upgrades that have happened throughout. So like when stories came, when they hit certain milestones.
How do you follow? Okay, so wait, I have a
No,
question.
sure.
I run a community for digital nomads, and Garrett from the community asked a question: how do you stay ahead of the always changing trends? It seems like every time we figure something out, the algorithm changes. So how do you follow the new trends, and how do you stay ahead? Any thoughts
Sure.
on that?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts on it. It's a huge part of my job. Literally part of my job, a big part of my job, I would argue. And I work in social media. So like you don't necessarily, you, the listener, doesn't necessarily need to do this. You need to listen to people like me because I'm doing the work for you. But the way that I stay on top of it is several ways. One, and this is the most important, bar none, is I'm active in all the channels that I talk about. Like there is no channel that I train on all these channels, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook ads. Like I train on all of them. You better believe I spend a ton of time all the time in these channels. I often am the first, like, oh, I didn't even know this changed, but here it is in my feed. And I go and tell my cohort about it because like, if you're in the channel, you'll see it. Don't be afraid to like break something. If you see a button and you don't know what it does, push it, like see what it does. Like it's interesting. I am completely self-taught because somebody my age has to be self-taught. There was literally no social media when I was in college, like, so I figured this all out as I went. And now here I am, like many years later, still doing it. Like I figured this out as I went, like, because you couldn't major in social media in
No, you
college.
couldn't.
Yeah, you can. Then you couldn't. So the best thing you can do is actually be in the channels you care about. And that gets back to like not auto posting. Like if you're just sending content out into the world and not paying attention. So any content that I talk about, I'm actively engaged in. But then on top of that, I'm in Facebook groups that share helpful information.
Mm-hmm.
I sign up for mailing lists. I love email for news. So I've got a couple mailing lists. Matt Navarra. Are you familiar with Matt?
I'm not. Mm-hmm.
I can't remember which group we met in. But Matt Navarra is just like a social media curator. He's the guy catching all the new stuff and putting it all in one place. He has a weekly email list. Honestly, it's a little overwhelming. It's like very long. It's called the Social Media Geek Out. I think that's what it's called. And it's once a week, and it's like a long digest of changes. He also has a Facebook group called the Social Media Geek Out. He has a podcast called the Social Media Geek Out. Like you can see a trend. So his Facebook group is like tens of thousands of people that care about social, all getting together and having a conversation. So I find stuff in there. But then there's other people, Casey Newton and Kara Swisher. I follow a lot of journalists. I'm on Twitter a lot. I see a lot of like breaking things on there. But the biggest thing, bar none, is just like being active in the channels because you'll see it, like things roll out. And then also like I do pay attention to the social channels direct. Like they all put out updates. Like you can like check their blogs, like Facebook blogs, when they make a change, you can read about it. But honestly, it's like I see the stuff in my feed more regularly than I read about it on their blog.
Okay. Great.
Again, I am not recommending Garrett do any of that stuff. What I am recommending is Garrett pick a person like me, obviously, or Matt Navarra or somebody like that, and just start like subscribing to some stuff and like, let us do the hard work of keeping up with the platforms, and you just,
yeah, that's actually really good advice. Thank you. LinkedIn and Twitter, best tip for each of these platforms to really leverage it and use it to one's benefit to grow your brand.
So Twitter, Twitter is now always, you cannot like, so I once was talking to a woman who ran a very large organization. And we were talking about Twitter. And I said, okay, what's your current approach to Twitter? And she said, I have it on my calendar that every morning at 8 a.m. I'll send a tweet. And I said, delete that. Like, you're not ever going to see benefit from doing one tweet a morning. Like, that's not. Now, again, this goes against my master your social in 20 minutes because this is a different question. Like, how do you master Twitter is different than how do you master social in 20 minutes a day. Twitter is real time. So if you really want to get the most out of Twitter, you have to be involved. So like if you go to an event and there's a hashtag, be involved in that hashtag, like chime in, weigh in, talk about the things you're doing. So what I told her was, and again, this goes against my advice from earlier, which I stand by for like a business, but is very different from somebody trying to like master Twitter. With Twitter, you need to go out there and like talk about the things you're doing in real time as you're doing them, get involved in conversations. Like Twitter's huge for engagement. And then the other best thing you could do on Twitter is set up lists and use TweetDeck. I have an entire podcast episode on Twitter lists and TweetDeck. Twitter lists are how you make essentially take the chaos out of Twitter and turn it into something like navigatable. And TweetDeck's a free tool owned by Twitter that lets you like monitor lists in real time. So check out that podcast episode, play around with lists, very powerful tool. For LinkedIn, one of the biggest things I see that sort of rolls my eyes is like people like to tag everybody they know on LinkedIn in a post. Like if it's not relevant to me, like
Why are you tagging me?
Like I get it. I appreciate that. Like you think I'm going to want to see it, but like, like I don't know what you want me to do now. So the best thing you can do with LinkedIn, I mean, honestly, the LinkedIn algorithm changes a lot. It seems to change almost more than any of the others. There was a minute there, like maybe a year and a half ago, where if you did a video on LinkedIn, it was going to get 10,000 views. And it was like nuts. Like it made no sense. Like LinkedIn was just like desperate for videos. So they were just like showing it to everybody. And that doesn't exist anymore. Like these things change. Like great, lean into it and then recognize. But with LinkedIn, I think the best thing you can do, really, it's the same advice for all of them. Like engage. I see people post cool content and then somebody asks a question and they don't respond. Instead of doing yourself a favor, you actually hurt your brand, right? Like instead of being like creating a relationship with somebody who might turn into a client or a networking partner, you essentially said, I want you to listen to me and then shut up, right? Like that's what you're doing. When you post content, somebody asks a question, you don't reply. You're literally saying you should be listening to me, not talking to me. And it's like, how disrespectful to your audience to say that your time isn't worth like respond, so I think that's true on all platforms, but I definitely think LinkedIn's an easy one to like, to post content and not engage.
Yeah. LinkedIn groups as effective as Facebook groups?
Not even close.
Okay.
In my experience, so LinkedIn created groups. Like LinkedIn had groups before Facebook. And for whatever reason, LinkedIn just blew it on groups. I work with a nonprofit that has a group on LinkedIn that has a ton of members. And we actually just recently took it on as a project to try to like resurrect that group. And it's like non-resurrectable. It's just like they don't, first of all, you can't manage it as a page the way you can on Facebook. So it's like you, the person. And I just like, I don't see content in my feeds from it. It's not showing up in the algorithm. Sometimes I get alerts, but not often. There's just very little engagement. That's my personal experience. I've definitely given presentations on Facebook groups and had people be like, I love LinkedIn groups, but few and far between. Facebook groups, no question. I see content in my feed from Facebook groups. Like every third post is from a Facebook group.
Yeah,
LinkedIn,
same.
I'm on LinkedIn every day. I never see LinkedIn group content ever. And I'm in groups and there's just no content in there. So it's hard to know. One other thing about LinkedIn that's not working that I'm like waiting for them to pull the plug is stories. I go into my stories all the time and there's 0 stories. And I'm like, at what point is LinkedIn going to like put their tail between their legs and just remove this from our feed?
How
like
interesting that some elements work well in one platform and they don't work in another platform. But
really... And LinkedIn rolled out stories sort of like during pandemic, which was the gamble. Like I think it was during the pandemic. I think if you want to be the workplace talking about real-time things, like, okay, maybe 5 years ago, like, hey, check us out at the ping pong table, the networking event, whatever. But like, I'm very surprised that they still exist.
Okay,
my guess is they'll be gone soon.
Okay. I have 4 questions before we wrap up. So we're going to do it relatively quickly. Clubhouse, yay or nay?
If you think your audience is there, great. If you think you can learn from there, great. I have chimed in on Clubhouse, like I've listened. Very rarely. And honestly, I think that Twitter Spaces and Facebook's also coming out with an audio platform will replace Clubhouse. Clubhouse is no longer growing. So if you're like skeptical about it, don't bother. Like you don't need to be there. If you're curious about it, by all means. I found it to be more noise than value, but it's all about who you follow. I just don't like the real time component of it. Like, hey, I don't want to listen to this interesting conversation right now. I'm working, but I'd listen later and I'd rather listen to a podcast. I listen to podcasts all the time and Clubhouse has not replaced podcast listening for me, even a little bit.
Yeah, same. Video, should people be jumping deeply into video or they can wait and stick with text-based posts? And same with Facebook Live, how often should we be going live? And anything you want to say about video?
So video in general, the platforms like video, so it's a good thing to do. But if you're not comfortable with it, it's not don't, like the goal here isn't to
Don't
put
force
yourself so far out
yourself,
your comfort zone that you're like crying at night, like that's not the goal. So if you're comfortable with video and if it's good for your like content, great. And if you're not, that's fine too. Like find other ways, infographics, memes,
Yep.
sharing articles, like share content that's comfortable for you, that resonates with you, and that you think will resonate with your audience. So like Facebook Live, I work with clients. I have one client that I've worked on Facebook Live where they're doing at this point 2 or 3 weekly Facebook Live events, and they're great. And I love it. And I've worked with other clients where they go Facebook Live when it makes sense. So I would say, do live when it works for you and don't try to force it. But, if you want to like create a weekly show on Facebook, great, like do it.
Yeah.
But, if it's a stretch, don't do it.
Do you recommend having a plan, a content calendar, an editorial calendar? Yes or no? And any tips about that?
Yeah, so that's definitely part of my mastering your social is like that content calendar to know what's coming so that you can be prepared. The worst thing that happens is it's like you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, there's a big thing happening today and I forgot about it. It just puts too much onus on you. So like part of that 20 minutes a day is like you've got to plan for what's coming and you're like prepared for it. So yes.
Okay.
And as far as the process, I mean, it's really about you. Like, is it just you that you can do it in a Microsoft, in Notes, you can do it on a Word doc, you can do it in a Google Doc. If you have a team, you're obviously going to want it to live in a place where like numerous people can engage with it. So I personally use Google Drive, but Slack's good. And if you want to use Microsoft, whatever works for you, Trello, stuff like that. But like definitely have a process that works for you and your team.
That is terrific. My last question for you. This is a podcast for parentpreneurs and you're parent of 2 little boys. How do you balance being an entrepreneur, being a coach, being a digital media expert with raising these 2 boys, family, work balance? Any tips about that, do's and don'ts?
So we have help, during the day, which we couldn't run my wife works from home, but has like a job and I, run my own business and we definitely couldn't do that without help. And not everybody's in a position to have help. And so, that's like a whole different story. But I think the big thing is like setting aside time to be a professional and setting aside time to be a parent. And, some people that's a hard line to find. And, I work in politics, like the phone's always my Slack is constantly blowing up and I have to pick and choose like, well, it's dinner time, I'm not going to touch this, or it's bedtime, I'm not going to touch this. And then, I'll respond to it after. But yeah, try to set aside time during the day for work and then try to set aside time in the mornings and the afternoons where it's like kids are the focus. But yeah, I don't know. Any other tips you have, I'll happily take them.
I could do probably an episode or 2 just on that. I want to thank you, Josh, for all the golden nuggets and the pearls of wisdom that you've shared with us. I just want to show you my notebook. Like this is nice. Everything. And there's so much to think about and so many just great actionable tips. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you? Tell me some of your handles, some of your places online.
So my website is joshklemons.com. That's Lemons, joshklemons.com. Mm-hmm. I am on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So you can find me, Josh Klemons, Reverbal Communications on Facebook. Mm-hmm. But pretty much J Lemons K on Twitter and Instagram, Josh Klemons or Reverbal on LinkedIn. You mentioned this earlier, obviously. So I have a podcast. It's called Step Up Your Social. All the episodes are short, around 10 minutes or less. Right. And they provide quick, actionable tips to take your digital marketing to the next level. And you can listen to all of those podcast episodes for free anywhere you stream podcasts or at stepupyoursocial.com. So if you go to stepupyoursocial.com, you can find links to everything on there. I blog not as often as I'd like, but pretty often. And I try to create like helpful content as often as possible. So if you go to joshklemons.com, the blog's there. If anybody would like to sign up for my mailing list, I don't email as often as I should, honestly, but I try to share helpful content. Just go to joshklemons.com/prez, P-R-E-Z. In the next few months, I am hoping, everything's a work in progress, but I am hoping to have a book ready to go in the next few months on Master Your Social in 20 minutes a day. So if anybody would like to get details on that, be kept up to date, definitely sign up for the mailing list and or connect with me on social. But yeah, I'm around and I engage.
You're everywhere.
Yeah,
thank you so much for sharing this time and space with me. It was a great, great pleasure and to be continued very soon. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you.